And Commissioner Cameron are away today, but we do have a quorum of 3, so we will go ahead. And we're going to go straight to, I think, Executive Director Day for his maiden presentation.
Yes, that would be the case. Just a few things, if I might, Chairman Crosby and members of the Commission. One thing we've been doing a lot of discussing about is transition as we move to further develop the organization. One of the important things is that we, as staff and others, are clearly aware of the Commission's expectations and planned interactions with staff. And of course, me, it's important to that as an initial step in the planning and organization. With that, one thing I wanted to check in with the Commissioners and the Chairman is, of course, according to the statute, the chairman has the supervision and control over the affairs of the commission. But I'd like to verify with Chairman Crosby and fellow commissioners that the chairman reaffirms the delegation to each of those commissioners that you have been following at this point for coordination with, make sure we have proper coordination with staff. And that was based on what I understood was the following expertise and interest. Commissioner McHugh, of course, elected secretary, legal matters, rule promulgation, and applicant evaluation. Commissioner Zuniga, elected treasurer, budget and accounting, administration and finance. Commissioner Cameron, law enforcement matters and horse racing. Commissioner Stebbins, community, workforce, and supplier development, general economic development, applicant evaluation and hiring process. Chairman Crosby, in addition to general operations, communication, community outreach, research, and problem gambling. So with this, and I'll assume that we are still on the right track. Or?
Does that characterization sound right to you?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
Yeah. The only edit I would make is, with respect to me, will be on hiring, and I think, obviously, with your addition of the staff and other key people, we'll find ourselves stepping back from doing a lot of the hiring.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess.
But we're all going to be sort of stepping back from those areas. Right. But maybe a little bit of your sense about the interview process and so forth, and sort of keeping an eye on that on behalf of the commission. Okay. It's not going to be a big deal, I agree, but I think just that is one more piece of our puzzle that it's going to be a lot of hiring, a lot going on, and having a little bit of oversight by you, I think, still makes some sense.
Sure.
No, from my perspective, I'm not in any hurry for you to move too far back. And then to support the Commission's work, we would plan to move with the Commission's agreement to a system of staff presentations and recommendations, and staff reports will be written and provided to the Commission in advance and generally pose questions and offer possible solutions for the Commissioner's consideration. The Commission, in addition to support this part of the process, would plan 2 pre-scheduled meetings per month. We begin the new schedule in May, and probably most likely as we move forward incorporate a regional rotation of meetings. The meetings would generally begin about 9:30 through about 3:30 in the afternoon. Of course, the Commission can add special meetings or change that schedule as it would deem necessary.
Yeah, let me just put some context on this for people that are watching. As anybody who's been watching knows, the commissioners have been doing an awful lot of the staff work, and we've been bringing recommendations to the commission because we had to assume staff roles before there were any staff. Now we've begun to fill out most of our senior staff positions as well as the executive director, and are going to switch out of the staff role into more of just a commission decision-making, policy-making role. So that'll change the nature of these meetings a little bit, and so we'll be relying much more heavily on presentations from staff about the issues that are teed up rather than presentations from commissioners, which is what you will have seen in the past. The meeting frequency, we've discussed this quite a bit. We felt at first that we really needed a meeting every week because we had decisions we had to make every week. I think there are mixed feelings about going to once every 2 weeks, but because we can have another meeting on a 48-hour notice, we thought it was worth, as part of this kind of professionalizing the staff operations, to have the meetings be a little longer and less frequent. So again, for people who have been involved, They will, starting in May, they will be every other week, and they will start at 9:30 in the morning rather than at 1:30 in the afternoon. And if we find that we need more meetings, we can easily schedule them in, as you said. And this will obviously all be posted, but I know some of you set your clocks by Thursday at 1, so I didn't want you to get screwed up in May.
But they're also anticipated to be done on Thursdays, or to take place on Thursdays, is that correct?
Still on Thursdays? Yeah.
Correct, that would be the recommended date.
Right.
Continue with that, and thank you for that clarification, Chairman. As a matter of fact, we're hopeful in the process to see if we can find, as we move forward, especially to the suitability considerations when the commission enters that area, to being able to find a larger space that will accommodate staff and the commissioners, and probably a larger attendance at that time.
Right.
And of course, we have coming up is the public hearing on Phase 2 regulations, which is May 3rd, just for those who might be watching.
And again, just for clarification, next week, we are combining our public hearing on the regs with our regular meeting. And it will be Friday, May 3rd at 9:30 in the morning. So our Thursday meeting, 9 o'clock, okay. Our Thursday meeting will not take place next week. It'll be Friday morning at 9 instead, in conjunction with the hearings on the regs.
Thank you. And we would recommend May 16th and May 30th to start the rotation, and following through with that, absent of any additional change, would end up June 13th and June 27th.
Right.
You already talked, I mean, the goal is to hopefully plan the topics and have time to have staff presentations to the extent that's possible.
Right.
And I'll, as I am today, I'll start being responsible for a staff report, include any administrative matters and any staff follow-up that I can handle briefly. And I've also, of course, had the opportunity to discuss any possible changes with Chief of Staff Riley, and we've been able to work out some schedules, which I think is going to be helpful for both of us. And then besides that, that part of the transition, there's one other question that's come up in that topic, is whether or not the commissioners would like to consider or like to add back in a fixed period at the end of the meetings for public comment. So it just kind of raise that for discussion and your direction as to how you might want to do that with the agendas as we move forward.
Yeah, I think we ought to wait on that one until the other commissioners are here. I think everybody will want to weigh in on that. Executive Director Day has recommended that in some places there is a sort of standard operating procedure that there's an opportunity for public comment. I'm kind of mixed on that myself, but I think we ought to talk about it with Jim and Gail.
It does have both positive and potential negative consequences.
Right.
And then besides those administrative matters, there's a additional item that's come up that I might ask our communications director to join me, if she would be so kind, is we've had some discussion, and I'll term it as the qualifiers list. And what that is, of course, is based from the applicants we have and those that are qualifiers and undergoing investigations during the process. And so in order to preserve the appropriate privacy and confidentiality of those records and the efficient management of staff resources, make sure we got and prove our accuracy, make sure we had an accurate list. What we've been attempting to do is decided to do, is to update that list every 30 days.
30 days, okay.
And then have it available upon request. And that'll allow us to use staff a little bit more efficiently too. We're not constantly trying to work with that particular list. But Elaine has also mentioned here recently that it might be a good idea to look at, now that that list is sort of an accepted item, that maybe it would save some time and make it more available, and folks would know where to go for the latest example if it were posted on our website. So we thought it best to have a brief discussion with the commissioners about whether you think that would be the best route or not.
So my concern is because up until now, we have been issuing the list of qualifiers based on individual requests to the commission. media outlets might be asking for it from me, and then other general public, municipalities, et cetera, might be asking for it from maybe either the legal department or the ombudsman. And my concern with that is that if we're going to be updating it every 30 days, that what might end up happening is that there's multiple versions of that list out in the public. And in my concern with that would be is it's very difficult once that list is updated to then attempt to reissue it to all of the different individuals that have asked for it along the way over the last X amount of months. So that then means, without any official documentation of it and disclaimer / caveats in an official place on our website, that means that individuals may all have different versions of it. It means that, for example, a media outlet recently received it from a citizen in a community, which means, too, that it might be being passed around to different individuals without the disclaimer and caveat that right now it needs. So for me, I feel like it would be best if we could post that on the site with a clear disclaimer that this is subject to change, and that we will do our best to update it every 30 days. So that there's one central authoritative location to access this list. That's my thought process.
We haven't had any pushback from John or Karen. We haven't had any pushback from the applicants about having that be completely public, have we?
The qualifier list
Yeah.
itself? No.
Right. So I can't see why there would be any issue with that. You know, it's critically important to have an effective date on it that's really obvious, and it's critically important to have that disclaimer that says this changes. And I think I suggested the other day that, you know, we could, if people think they know something we don't know, they can tell us. I mean, if, you know, invite people, you know, to say this is effective as of such and such, it does subject to change, and if you have any suggestions or any amendments or something like that. But the only thing I have a problem with is the 30 days, and I haven't raised it as you've mentioned this possibility, but that seems too long to me, because it changes pretty frequently, and I think people misunderstand the importance of this. I think people think of this as sort of a proxy for the application, and so surrounding communities get hot and bothered about it in a way that is not particularly really appropriate, but they are hot and bothered about it. And to wait for a month in between updates seems like a long time to me. Does anybody else, including John or Karen, have thoughts about that?
Well, I think that the recent 2 or 3 months may not be representative
Well, that's true.
of what may be to come, especially after the period of investigations, because a lot of things are being sorted out. You know, we began this process with the scope of licensing to begin with, where qualifiers thought only certain people would qualify, and after those meetings,
Right.
The IAB made a number of determinations. So I think the 30 days attempts to balance the need, the administrative burden in terms of updating and double-checking a document that's now going to be public.
But is it onerous to update it? I mean, if we updated it every 2 weeks as opposed to every month, is that a problem for anybody?
Well, Chairman Crosby, I think part of the idea in this perspective is to make sure that the commission has the information that's come in and given IAB the opportunity to determine that that's a qualifier and that person needs to be posted. So that was just to make sure there's enough space for people to do it in a fairly reasonable fashion. making sure we got the right documents and then going ahead and making sure there's a consistent approval. So that was the idea, is to make sure we have a consistent date within the time of receipt of information. I think it wouldn't be the end of the world if we tried to do it within 2 weeks, but.
How much, is there still, Commissioner Zuniga is suggesting that the frequency of change is diminishing. Do we have reason to think that's true?
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
I think that, it all is dependent on the entity. So there may be an entity, there are some entities which are really kind of a closed shop, if you will, and don't expect a lot of change, but others may have them, and a lot of that is up to the entity. For example, there may be, a corporation with a significant number of board of directors, and right now it's been pretty consistent, but they might change 3 over the next 3 months, and then there would be an issue there. So it's a little hard to predict.
Yeah.
But as the commission is aware, this sort of suitability piece, it's ongoing. So we'll do our investigation and give the commission a report, but the IEB and as an agent of the commission will still be looking into these entities as time goes on.
Right.
So we will still have this interaction with these applicants who then may or may not become licensees, and that we're still involved in the process. So it's not as if suitability itself ever really ends, because we're always checking into it and always keeping a watch on what's happening in Massachusetts.
Right.
I would add to that and I was suggesting that the period was diminishing, but not in perpetuity. There will be, let's not forget, once applicants obtain real hard financing, that list may vary, significantly based on the sources of funds. Right. Or it may not. We really don't know. Maybe it all depends, as Director Wells suggests. I also want to emphasize that I would agree with the notion of having some time to allow the IEB to look into, first be notified that somebody may be retiring or have the necessity to add to the qualifier list, and have the ability to corroborate that information and get the appropriate information, and then update the list. I would differentiate from just having a running spreadsheet and then a matter of posting it as perhaps a very different process.
Maybe I'm oversensitive. Do you, Ombudsman, do you have an opinion? Is 30 days fine from your standpoint?
Well, I think what's important is that we communicate to the outside world that this is a process that is ongoing. Part of the issue, I think, is that when people look at a date and time, it may not catch the nuances of the fact that our IEB is in the process of reviewing certain people that will be put on the qualifier list at any one point in time. So even if you point out a specific date, there still may be conversations that are ongoing where that one particular person or entity will be a qualifier. So the thought of updating it daily provides me some pause, because I don't know if we have that sort of specificity that we can know from a day-to-day basis when somebody is going to be a qualifier. If we have a set date, be it 2 weeks or be it 30 days, at least staff can get ready to say, well, hey, we know that there's an update. There were a couple of people that are in process. Let's make sure that they are actually the qualifiers that we've had the conversations with the applicants, so that we can put them on the qualifier list and we know that that's correct. So I don't really have a specific thought about 30 days or 2 weeks. I just think if you do it too often, there's a level of expectation of precision that is often not possible.
Well, if nobody's troubled by this other than me, then let's go with 30 days.
And on the web?
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
Quick question. How would you deal with the updates whereby not necessarily a new name is being added, but a name might have been removed? If I'm looking at a list 1 month and a month later I go back and check the list and see a name isn't there, some note that people are removed. The focus about updating the list is mostly centered around new names coming on and the chance to kind of put them through some type of IEB review to see if they are a qualifier. But do you see any need to note why a name may have been taken off?
Commissioner Stebbins, I do not think it, because it's a business transaction and they may move them for a number of reasons.
Okay.
So
Just noting that
Right.
if you see a name and it's not there the following month
And for the purposes of this list, which is really those qualifiers that are associated with the applicants.
And, you know, people, the press can always ask if they want to raise the question. Okay.
Yeah, I agree, just taking control of the information, the disclaimer that this process is fluid and that's the latest update would be to everybody's benefit.
So the first new one would be when? Or what's the date of the one that's out there now?
Right now, the date on the document right now is April 5th. So maybe what we can do is once the next document is ready, with the 30-day update, we can post that one, and that will be the first one that goes up on the web, would be
But
my suggestion.
Sometime between not later than May 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Great.
Okay.
Thank you. If we're ready to go to the master schedule.
Yeah. Great.
Director Wells and let's Siemba. This is part of my effort to make sure I can instantaneously defer any questions.
Right.
What we'd like to do is Commission had asked it's time to revisit the master schedule, and so we have been doing a lot of review of the schedule and trying to focus in on items that might be coming forward. So what I'd like to do to help initiate that discussion is summarize several staff recommendations or suggestions. And if I can just run through those all so you can kind of get a picture of what they might be. And then I'm sure there'll be discussion and questions, and John and Karen will be happy to answer any of those that come up. And I'll start with the Category 2 licenses, because we are, in this particular case, we are recommending that the date for presentation of IAB suitability reports be moved forward to June 13th. And particularly as these reports are the first IAB reports, they should provide sufficient time to ensure that those reports are properly developed. So we're really going to be dealing with kind of an unknown here as we come forward with these suitability reports, and we'd like to make sure they're available. They're available in advance to the commissioners so we can also follow the rest of our processes. And as we've looked at the schedule at this point, though, we don't believe that change will impact the commission's ultimate award date at this point of 12/2. For Category 1 licenses, we are recommending that the date for presentation of IAB suitability reports be moved forward to a period that both of these have been under discussion, and we're confident the commissioners are pretty aware of at least the need compared to what's on schedule now. But to be moved forward to a period beginning August 5th through August 30th. And we suggested probably a rolling report plan based on report completion is probably going to be the best, most practical way to handle that and to be able to get it done in a reasonable time that isn't too overwhelming.
So what were the dates? August 5th?
August 5th through August 30th. And I have to acknowledge, and I'm positive Karen will reemphasize this, that this period is somewhat of a challenge. Right. So, but we're at least at this point, and as we have further discussions, we can continue to flesh it out, but we think it's doable at this point. Then for Category 1 licenses, we're also suggesting that the commissioners consider moving the Phase 2 application due date to December 1 from December 31. So basically, we're suggesting that that date should be moved 30 days earlier than we had on the current master schedule. And there are pros and cons to taking the step. A couple of the pros are, of course, allows more time for surrounding communities.
Give me the date again, I'm sorry. So the date would be?
12/31 to December 2nd?
Actually, so when we did the analysis, we were thinking about the beginning of the month, which would be December 1st, but taking a look at those dates, the 1st of December is on a Sunday. So we came up with a couple of different options for that week of December 3rd or December 6th, and I can go over the timetables of when everything would do in a couple minutes.
And that's for category
One.
For
Right.
category one.
So there's a number of pros and cons, and John will most likely have more detail around that, but it would help with the surrounding community process, allow 30 days additional for the commission, and it's to have that before present scheduled award date. The con is, on the other hand, that it's going to shorten the period for the applicants who may very well be planning on that additional 30 days for the proposals, and also the host community agreement process. It'll move that process back a month as well. Another item that we think that would be important for the commissioners to consider is not necessarily a direct time impact on the schedule, but may provide more room for the surrounding communities to be able to have an opportunity to weigh in regarding impacts in their communities. And that would be to begin the involuntary disbursement process 60 days before an application is submitted. So that may help sort of as a default if there hasn't been any progress before that. And then some...
So that would be October, first week of October, basically.
I think we're kind of looking at it would be dependent on the application date itself.
Right.
But if everybody waited till the December deadline, then that would be the case. And there is at least some, quite a bit of discussion that it's possible but highly unlikely that applicants would actually submit applications before the due date.
Right.
In any great time length, anyway. And then, in addition to these steps, we've also definitely are preparing, and we'll have the application formats ready to be released with the Phase 2 regulations when they're final. So we think it's important that that be out and available to the applicant.
Which is June 6th, 7th, something like that?
Right,
Yeah.
first week in June.
Right.
And then finally, I have deliberately not discussed a couple other huge points. One of those is the application evaluation period, because we're just in the process of trying to work out a process and the time lengths that it would take. So we need to take some more steps before we can actually predict that with any great accuracy. So that is something I think we'll have to come back to the commission, and of course interested in any guidance that you might have here today as well. And then we also have not talked at this point about the actual board dates. We've talked a little bit about the Category 2, which we don't see much change in, but we've got the award date for Category 1, and have things that will have to be considered, including if there's any negotiation before the final award and other things that might actually impact that end date. But we figure that'll be part of the ongoing discussion here we'll have in the next few weeks.
Right.
That is the recommendations we're at for today, and I know John has some additional comment on the schedule.
Well, let me ask you a question. What's the thought process, what's the purpose of moving the application date sooner, closer to us? What's the purpose of taking that month off?
So if you take a look at our current schedule with an anticipated application deadline of December 31st, what we have not put into our draft timetable is the amount of days that it will take to resolve disputes between applicants and potential surrounding communities, or applicants and potential live entertainment venues. If you take a look at the number of days that we have in our draft regulation to accomplish that, it's extremely tight process, but even with that tight process, that's a good 85 days, and that's as if it goes according to plan. So if you add your 85 days on top of December 31st, you're well into March, and it could proceed further into April if there's any further slippage. And we note that the legislature and the governor have that they're counting on the revenues from the licensing fees, and to the extent that the licensing fees shall be due and payable 30 days after we grant our conditional license, we're getting into periods that are close to the end of the fiscal year. And for certainty, for budgeting certainty, and if there's any sort of a revenue downgrade, that could really cause some concerns with people on the Hill. about our ability to meet our deadlines. In addition, the commission has been, throughout the process, mindful that we're trying to get these licenses up and running as quickly as possible in order to generate the revenues and the jobs as quickly as possible. So to the extent that things that are out of our control, these arbitration procedures, might have a way of lengthening our schedule, we thought it would be a good idea to take a look at whether or not there's any flexibility on moving things a little bit back so that we can resolve some of those disputes ahead of time.
There's a lot of topics to address, but on that note, if we were to bring back the Category 1 deadline as it's modeled there, this used to be over here as 12/31,
Right.
with the following the process for the evaluation. The only way to gain in the schedule, in other words, to bring these back, is if we did work on, if nothing else, modeling these host and surrounding community agreements happening earlier than what it's currently projected here. This was perhaps, when we modeled it, the latest date of a host community agreement with the minimum 60 days, because it could be as long as 90 for the referendum to take place, assuming, let's say, the day before the application is submitted. This date would have to be pushed back and modeled, I suspect, to varying degrees depending on the community, because they all have different assumptions as to when they are going to do this, and we'd have to take that into account to really gain in the schedule, because if this local process is not, or happens as late as it's modeled there, moving the application deadline doesn't do anything.
Well, clearly, we couldn't, we'd have to, obviously we'd have to move
Right.
those other two. But I don't think the host community agreement and the referendum is a problem. I mean, there's nobody talking about not concluding the host community agreement until, November or December, so the surrounding community agreement is something we need to talk about, but I don't think the host community agreement and the referendum is a problem. I think that's fungible.
Yeah, the only thing I would comment on is that it's impossible for me to tell at this point, when we do a Category 1 report, if there is something that's contested by the applicant and they want to take part in a hearing and they request a hearing, that period that Commissioner Zuniga is pointing out, they'll need at least that time.
Right.
So if we move the whole schedule over a little bit, because our target date for the August 5th or the August 5th through August 30th for presenting these is in that time period, I would just caution folks that that suitability determination may not be in that August timeframe if there's a hearing.
Right.
So if that takes place, then the applicant and the commissioners need to be aware that they may need to schedule a referendum potentially before the suitability determination is made, if that is the process. So just as long as the community out there is aware of that, the commissioner is aware of it, we can work around that, and we can make that workable for both the applicants and the commission, but they should be aware of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it's important to say that, we have been under pressure to speed up from lots of people for a long time. I will read you a letter I got from the chairman of the Board of Selectmen of the town of Hopkinton. However, my early impression is that the commission is doing too much, too soon, and too fast. So the pressures are beginning to swing as people are coming to grips with the process. And as we've talked about a couple of weeks now, there's pressure from bidders, host communities, and surrounding communities to slow down now. But having said that, I think it's important for us to say what we've always said, which is we're not going to compromise the integrity of the process for speed. And if we can squeeze a month or two out of this, I'm totally in favor of it for obvious reasons. But if it, I think we have to say it straight, that if it turns out that we don't get this done in time to get all the license money in, we'll be sorry, but that's life. And we'll do everything we possibly can, but we can't let that be a club or something that we're anxious about and cause us to do something that doesn't really work for everybody. And I'm not suggesting that you are doing that. I don't think you are. But I think I want to say it right now. If it ends up we happen to miss that deadline, we miss that deadline. Too bad. We don't want to. We'll try not to. But that won't affect our adherence to the best possible process. Now, having said that, I'm totally in favor of trying to squeeze this time out as we can. And I think the most important issue, which is what you're getting to, is the surrounding community process. And so let's walk through how that works in the context of this.
So, Mr. Chairman, as you know, we've heard from a number.
Let me just, John, just as a matter of sort of a principle, I just said something that was really important, and so I want to make sure that I'm not out in front of you guys.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think the paramount objective is to do this right and to do it well and to do it in a way that's fair to everybody. So we have to balance all of that.
Right.
No objection.
Okay, good. Right.
So, Mr. Chairman, the second part of the discussion is relative to surrounding communities. As you know, we've heard a number of concerns from potential surrounding communities that we're moving too fast and that there might not be enough time to get technical assistance in order to evaluate proposals in advance of our application deadline. As we know, that within 10 days after the applications are filed by the applicants, communities shall petition the commission if they have not been designated as a surrounding community in an application to become a surrounding community. And communities need some store of information in order to make those requests. And if indeed those requests are granted, by statute, once we make a determination that a community is a surrounding community, you immediately go to a negotiation of a mitigation agreement. And so what we've always been concerned about is how are potential surrounding communities going to be able to be in a position to be able to have a negotiation and to be able to understand the impacts when you have such a tight time period after our determination. So in crafting our draft regulations, we put in our draft that technical assistance funding could be petitioned from the commission, that there could be what we're calling the involuntary disbursements. So if an applicant and a potential surrounding community have not been able to reach an agreement on the provision of technical assistance, there's basically a relief valve for potential surrounding communities to come and petition the commission so that we can, in essence, order the applicant to provide technical assistance funding to those communities. So the current rule that we have, the draft rule that's up for hearing next week, is that 30 days after a host community agreement is reached, potential surrounding communities can make petitions to the commission for involuntary disbursements. So we would then hear the concerns from the community, hear what the applicant's concerns would be, and then we would then make a determination of whether or not it was likely that that community would be designated as a surrounding community after the application is filed with us, and then we would make a determination of what funding is necessary to be provided to the community. The issue with that we've heard, in addition, I think generally there's a concern that communities are going to need a very long period of time to review impacts, and that those impacts can only be studied if the initial plans are available and the initial studies are available, which we completely understand. From the very beginning, we've asked applicants, and we've reiterated to applicants that you will be evaluated on how you do your outreach to these communities, and we encourage you to grant technical assistance dollars where they're necessary to evaluate impacts. In addition to that process, we established a very, very extensive process with regional planning agencies so that technical assistance funding could be available to those communities that want to take advantage of it, assuming that the applicant has utilized, that the applicant has agreed to go ahead with our RPA plan. But this involuntary disbursements process is basically the third leg. It's the third protection. First, you have the voluntary agreements with applicants and communities. The second process is the regional planning agency technical assistance process that I think is going to be a very good one. And if for some reason neither of those are in place, then the final protection is an involuntary disbursements process. But because the involuntary disbursements deadline is tied to the host community, there is a potential that any one applicant could not be able to enter into their host community agreement until very, very, very late in the process. So you could have a situation where a community could be left with 30 days or less to petition the commission and get technical assistance funding before our application date. And I just don't think that it's reasonable that communities would be able to actually utilize technical assistance and get things that are tremendously meaningful in that 30 days. I'll discuss in a couple minutes that there are some time periods after the application date that those technical assistance can continue on. But at a minimum, we thought that there should be at least 60 days available to communities so that they could petition the commission for technical assistance and utilize funding for those 60 days prior to the application of the applicant. And in the small subset of situations, you could have an applicant that just doesn't get their host community agreement until the very last minute, and you just have a very shorter period of time for the utilization of technical assistance. So our rule is that we are proposing is that it shall be that communities can petition us for technical assistance basically no later than 60 days prior to the application deadline. And that way, we at least, for that final escape valve, we at least give communities some time to utilize the technical assistance prior to the application date. I also note that there's the 10-day window where they have to petition the commission to be designated as a surrounding community. They can continue to utilize technical assistance during that 10-day window. There's a 10-day window after that first petition period, whereby applicants respond to the petition of the surrounding community. So there's an additional 10 days. So in total, there could be as much as 80 days before, or actually even more, because if you count the time period that the commission needs to decide on surrounding community status, be it 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, you could potentially have 87 days, 86 days of technical assistance before the negotiation that is mandated by the statute kicks in.
Right. I'm going to attempt to summarize a lot of the thoughts in there, but because this is key. No, this is key. What we had modeled in the past was a period of at least 60 days for the surrounding communities. By virtue of that's the least amount of time that they can execute an agreement and have a referendum. It could be 90, but let's assume the host community. But because the surrounding community process is tied to the host community, they would, agreement being executed, we initially thought there would be at least 60 days for surrounding communities. There could be more if they execute the host community agreement earlier, or if they do the referendum earlier than the deadline for the application. But in the worst case scenario, that could be as little as 60 days. But because, on the other hand, our other rule relative to petitioning involuntary disbursements ties that to the host community agreement plus 30 days, they could be effectively left with only 30 days, the balance to the 60 days.
Between the time they get money and the application.
Correct,
yeah.
Correct. So what you're suggesting now is to bind that to complement the original rule, host community agreement plus 30 days, with and no less than 60 days on the other end, tied to the application deadline. I mean, this could be a lot lengthier by virtue of when they conduct and execute their host community agreement and referendum versus our deadline. But this would ensure, if I'm not mistaken, at least a minimum of 60 days for surrounding communities before the deadline. Then a lot of what you said afterwards comes after that deadline. The
Right.
10 days for petitioning, 10 days for evaluation, and then the arbitration process, if they get to that. Is that a fair summary?
That's exactly right.
So, so what are the components of the 85 days again?
So the 85 days is, during the first 10 days, there's 10 days for the potential surrounding community.
10, 5,
petition
and 10.
commission.
You're right.
Then there's
60.
10 days for the applicant to respond to the
Right.
request. 10, 10, and then there's a period of days for the commission to decide.
On
I think
top.
we were thinking 5 days,
On
7 days.
top of the 60?
I know, I'm talking specifically after the 85 days.
Well, yeah, you
So,
just,
I'll just start from the beginning of the application. It's first 10 days for the petition.
Yeah.
10 days for the response by the applicant. 5 to 7 days for the commission to decide on those two petitions. And then you have a 5-day period for the determination of an arbitrator. And then you have 20 days of arbitration. I'm sorry, I skipped 30 days of negotiation.
Negotiation.
Sorry about that. 30 days of negotiation after the commission's decision. After 30 days of negotiation, you have a 5-day period for the pick of an arbitrator. After that 5 days, you have 20 days for the arbitration decision, and then 5 days after that for the execution of the agreements and modification of the agreements based on the decision of the arbitrator.
And then 30 days for the commission's review, because we cannot make a determination until.
yeah, but he's talking about time for them to do their work.
Right.
And that 30 days doesn't help them.
I know.
I don't know that it really, I don't think that it really makes sense to talk about the 30-day window of which there's supposed to be arbitration, negotiations, as time when they can be doing their work. I mean, they want to go into that 30 days with their work done, their analysis done.
Correct, yeah.
So it seems to me that you've really got 25 days from application.
From application.
Plus you've got the 60 days that you're guaranteeing. That's what I thought you meant by
Correct.
85, so.
Yeah, no, they both work out 85.
Yeah,
so.
that 85, I
Yeah.
think, is real. So you basically
Yeah.
give people 3 months. But my question is, what do you envision the surrounding community mitigation assessment, needs assessment to consist of? What, in general, just sort of, I know it's going to vary,
Yeah.
but how are you envisioning this to work?
Well, I'm expecting and I'm hoping for a lot of comments by next week on our regulations. But if indeed there is a significant store of information, if independent studies have been done by the applicant and independent studies have been done by a host community, for example, when the commission is making its decision on involuntary disbursements, it could weigh whether or not just peer review of those two studies is necessary versus what may be requested as an independent study in and of itself. And I think that would have to be done on a case-by-case basis when it goes into the the petitions. But perhaps that might deserve some more fleshing out during the regulatory process.
Because that's a very big difference. I mean, if you're talking about merely doing, in effect, a peer review
Yeah.
of pre-existing studies,
Yeah,
85 days is fine.
yeah,
But if you're talking about a de novo research project,
right.
where you're looking at a whole range of issues, traffic being the main one,
Yeah.
but a lot of other things as well, is 85 days?
Yeah, I talked to some experts, and it's pushing the margins, but between 30 and 60 days, it's doable if everything is working exactly right. And by working exactly right, it's anticipated that communities when they petition for involuntary disbursements, that they might have already been able to do some of the legwork on the procurement before they show up at the doorstep, so that on the date that they receive the award, potentially that they can execute contracts with consultants that they've chosen to start going on their reviews. And Commissioner Zuniga mentioned idea of potentially what we could do is we could, in our procurement of consultants, we could make our procurement of consultants potentially available to surrounding communities as well. So in essence, we could shrink the process by not having to go through the extensive procurement process by having available consultants at the ready.
Well, there's lots of ways they can do that.
Yeah.
Too, as we've talked about, there's Compass and
Yeah.
there's a variety of ways they can do that. I think we should mandate that practically. We're not going to stand for them to do a 60 to 90-day procurement process when they don't need to. That I agree with.
I think, the analysis is right on point at a first level relative to whether there would be required a new study. I find that unlikely, but we never know. There's the other piece of this, the regional planning agencies, which I think it would be, hopefully, a lot of people would take advantage of that from the surrounding community, and the applicants will recognize that. But they're not mandated, of course. Nobody will be required. I think the important piece, let's not forget, for a surrounding community, for many communities, for all communities, is relative to community engagement and information, and that takes time. That hopefully will minimize wrong perceptions, but that process of meetings, with the community, with the developer, etc. I envision that would be important, and maybe less about the technical analysis, even though that's important, and more about communicating and understanding community expectations. And that's I think for us to remember, because it could really help the process.
Where did you get the 60 days? Where did that, I mean, you had 30 in effect before, and you made it 60.
Yeah.
Where did that come from?
Well, why did we think, well...
As opposed to 90, for example, or 120?
Well, it could be 90 if the commission decided that, but taking a look at the range of our applicants, for example, it just works with our current schedule. With Category 2, if you have an application deadline of October 4th, the 60-day requirement would kick in on or about August 4th. So therefore, the 60-day requirement would apply to all applicants that execute a host community agreement after July 4th. But it's our understanding that most of our Category 2s might be executed in advance of July 4th. And if they're executed after July 4th, for example, July 7th, it would just be the period of days that would kick in sooner. So basically 3 days sooner than it otherwise would, with just the flat-out 30-day after the host community agreement. So for our Category 2s, it works. A 90-day requirement would not work with our Category 2s.
Right.
But again, Category 2s, the impacts that should be felt by surrounding communities are obviously much less for Category 2 than a Category 1.
I think, we're really, as a practical matter, we're talking about Category 1 here.
Right.
So, but I'm wondering whether it might not be a better idea to make the same mandate, but make it a 90-day mandate. That gives them basically 120 days real free time before they have to enter negotiations. And if so, that would mean what? September, basically September 1st.
So, for example, if the application date was December 2nd, for example, or December 3rd, the
90 days prior.
90 days prior.
Yeah, 60 days. Well, 60 days prior would be October 2nd. Therefore, the 60-day requirement would apply to all applicants that execute a host community agreement after September 2nd.
Say that sentence again.
So if we are using a 60-day requirement, then the 60-day requirement would kick in on October 2nd.
Right.
So therefore, the 60-day requirement would apply to all applicants that execute a host community agreement after September 2nd.
As opposed to the 30-day, you mean, so, okay, so if you did a host community agreement before September 2nd,
It doesn't apply.
you'd be on the 30-day?
Be on the 30-day.
Okay.
Yep.
So what I'm suggesting is pushing that back another 30 days. So if the involuntary disbursement process can begin 90 days before application, that would be essentially September 2nd, which would mean everybody that completes host community agreements prior to August 2nd, right? And which most people, I mean, there's going to be one or two exceptions, but I think almost everybody's aiming to get their elections now in September.
In September, so that
Right.
host community.
So they got to have 60 days before that, so that's July 2nd, July 5th, something like that. So it seems to me with no skin off any, the only skin off a nose is the bidder is 90 days away from application, but almost all of them will have virtually all, maybe literally all of them will have their host community agreements executed. They won't have had their referendum, but they will have had the host community agreement. And we will now be forcing them to disperse some monies on behalf of a surrounding community, before they get their referendum. But we've already broken that principle. We've already said that's all right. So why not, that seems to me cost-free to pick up an extra 30 days for surrounding communities.
Well, if you make a difference between Category 2 and Category 1, so if Category 2
Yeah.
was 60 and Category 1 was 90,
Well, it's not necessarily free. If we're suggesting that the deadline should be 30 days earlier.
In other words, 90 days before applications are due.
No, the deadline for applications.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We're saying no longer 12/31,
Right.
we may say 12/1. And then from 12/1, we say no longer 60, but 90 days in which you have to have your
No, where involuntary
involuntary
disbursements may take
disbursements
effect.
may take effect. Then, all of that is 4 months earlier than at least originally anticipated.
Yeah, but
No, it's a process that has to take place. It doesn't take much away. It's really contingent on the host community agreements and the referendum, really, or maybe the host community agreement only. So I think it's doable, but it's just something that
yeah,
at least some communities or applicants were not necessarily anticipating.
right.
and one of the purposes of this conversation, obviously, is involuntary disbursements as part of our hearing next week. So to the extent that whatever ideas we come up with would be folded into that regulation, it would be good to hear from people if that works. If that doesn't work,
Yeah, I mean, I think this would be something it would even be good to post, tomorrow morning to request comments on this, because this is a fairly big issue. But given the process that I participated with you, even realizing that was kind of an extreme group of surrounding communities, I think adding 30 days is a good idea. And it's really not a big deal for anybody, I don't think. And as you know, we're hoping not to have very many of these. We're hoping that the bidders understand that it's in their interest to cooperate with the surrounding communities. And we're not going to side with surrounding communities who are being unreasonable. So hopefully this will not matter. This won't happen very much, but if it does, it does.
Would we apply the 90 days also to Category 2? Because that
No,
would have...
we can't. You just
said we couldn't.
the dates don't work, because we're already.
We're already up against that.
But that's all right. I mean, again, I think the Category 2 are a lesser problem for, again, as you said, for all the reasons which are understandable. It's
arguably lesser impacts.
Right. It's a much less of an investment, it's smaller facilities, less traffic, et cetera. Anybody agree or disagree on the 90 days rather than 60?
The only thing, Chairman, that I recall in the whole discussion, so it's after the fact, so you have to correct me if I'm, but I remember the discussion a little bit even about the original 30 days waiting period was to make sure that there was really the burden for that interaction was on the applicants and the communities at least to do that. And we did have some of that discussion where we were talking about 60 or 90 days. Important to make sure that there was kind of a relief valve if there's no progress, but on the other hand, not being switch the whole process over too greatly to the commission itself rather than putting that pressure on the applicants and the communities. And then the other side of that too was the concept that the applicants ultimately have to face the music, so to speak, in the review process, because we do both outreach. We're going to be doing both evaluation on outreach and community impact, those kind of things. And if they come in to the commission with a bunch of communities that they have an outreach to, of course, that's obviously not going to be really good on the applicant.
Yeah, I actually think it's going to be as much a problem of surrounding communities not being reasonable as the bidders not being reasonable. There's going to be both. And we're going to be stuck where I think we're surrounding communities, but it really doesn't do the bidders much to unduly resist negotiations unreasonably resist, because they're going to lose that anyway. But the surrounding communities that really hate the idea of casinos are going to be doing everything in their power to slow the process down and find stumbling blocks and so forth. And I think it's going to put us in a position sometimes of standing up to surrounding communities and saying, you're being unreasonable. I'm sorry, we're not going to support your request for a $750,000 study because that's not necessary. So I think we'll be looking out for both sides on this. We're going to have to try to be the balancing act for both sides.
Mr. Chairman, one other little nuance, not that there's not enough nuance in that rule, is that in order to calculate days back, you have to calculate days back from a date. So if December 3rd is an application date where everybody is going to apply on that date, it's easy to calculate the 60 or 90 days back. If people apply at different times, we would have to create a mechanism in our regulations so that you could do the count back. So if somebody plans to apply on November 2nd for whatever reason, the 90 days would apply to November 2nd rather than to our end date of December 3rd or December 6th.
That might be a little tough to
enforce.
Who's going to know when? How are you going to know when you're going to
apply?
You're not going to know 90 days in advance.
Well, what could happen is, and a lot of my colleagues have said we're way lost on this concept, but there's some gamesmanship that could come into play where you could actually apply early and cut off a community's right to 60 or 90 days. So if indeed you said that the 90 days was to kick in on September 2nd, if you applied on September 3rd, you would, and that's not a real scenario, but I'm just using it for illustration purposes. If you applied for September 3rd, then you wouldn't be able to get the technical assistance for the 90 days.
But we're not going to let that happen. I think we have plenty of authority to not let people game the system and eliminate the ability for a surrounding community to.
And I think in general, we've been concentrating on this rolling application date, but I'm not sure that's reality. And for our staff planning purposes, because if you think about it, if at least some or portions of this application are public record when filed, there could be very competitive disadvantages to filing early, that your competitors would be able to take a look at your application and then make adjustments for their filings. So this may not be a real issue.
I'm on that camp. I don't think there will be anybody who finds it in their best interest to submit an application early just to skirt the surrounding community process. And even if they did, the arbitration process would ensue right away. They could then, because if an application is submitted
Yeah,
early.
but the surrounding community wouldn't have had any time to get its work done. That's the point he's making.
Yeah.
Well, but then
But they
it
won't- it's not-
it won't be,
it's not
it
gonna
won't be, it won't be subject to what we modeled as the minimum. There would be all these days that they could evaluate the host community agreement, which is part of the application.
We could maybe entertain a waiver request to have the technical assistance that would have otherwise been due before the application
Right.
to occur after the application,
Right.
because if it's early, we're not against the deadline, so
Right.
I think that there's probably ways to deal
Right,
with that.
I think that's right.
Not only that, if we went from 60 to 90 days, this is even less likely, because then the 90 days,
Yeah.
kicks in, regardless of when they submit the application.
So we can try to write this in a manner that is understandable to.
Our high-powered legal staff, high-powered legal staff, taking copious notes, I see.
Okay.
Chairman, there was one other
Yeah.
topic that actually we had discussed, and because it would require regulation change, we need to, probably should talk about that briefly. And that's that we might very well, we've had it as been thought that it would actually be in the application, but it might be beneficial to incorporate in the rules that the applicant, upon filing of their application, would also provide to the surrounding communities that have been determined surrounding communities, a list of all their research and impact studies that they've done to date. So what we had said is contemporaneous with filing the RFA2 application, applicant serves each community on the surrounding community contact list with written notice that is filed an application and a copy of the impact studies. So.
To the people that have been notified as surrounding communities?
Yes, yeah, so that the applicant has to push that information out rather than the surrounding communities having to go look for it. We thought it might be worthwhile just to incorporate that in the Phase 2 rules to make sure it's clear.
Fine.
So in regard to the application date, we can sort of model that for the commission at a future date, but the 3rd and the 6th, just by the way that the days work out and expirations of 30 days happening on a Sunday versus a Saturday, and both the 3rd and the 6th work out to almost about the same time for earliest decision points, but I can share that with the commission.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I have a couple of points and comments and questions about a few of these modifications and suggestions. One thing, if we were to pull back the deadline for Category 1 from December 31st to December 1st, we would effectively be shortening the duration that applicants have for preparing and submitting those Phase 2 applications, unless we made the form of application available sooner rather than later, or sooner than what's currently projected to be when the regulations become effective on June 6th or thereabouts, June 8th. So I would, from 200 or so days that they had, shortening that 30 days, it becomes 30 days less. And I would like us to take steps to finalize that form so that at least it could be made in draft and applicants have an opportunity to begin thinking about how to fill out the form.
Commissioner Zuniga, we had discussed about the importance of getting that out. The problem is when we started to look, we looked at getting it out early and the date that the rules go into effect, realistically, we thought it was going to end up being pretty close to the same time. Because at this point, we're 30 days.
June 7th,
Yeah.
June 6th or 7th.
We might be able to gain a few days, but
I think it's going to be a pretty big project getting that application form drafted up. Go ahead, did you have something else?
For which we could use the help of some advisors, but more on that later. The other piece, we, just to emphasize, we've updated the date of suitability reports to the commission up to June 12th, but just wanted to emphasize for the record that the duration of the review and the hearings period has been shortened to preserve the approval of the applicants for Category 2 to be still around the 25th of July, which is this date over here.
Right.
We have not taken that approach necessarily to the duration of the Category 1 for the review of Category 1 and a hearings period that could follow afterwards.
Meaning we've still left that long period.
We
Like
still left the
3
same duration. We've changed this date. We've updated it from, it was around end of early July or end of June. We've moved it to August 5th. As Director Day said, on a rolling basis, some of these could be, some of the suitability reports may come in at different times during this period, but there is still the probability of a hearings period that could take up to 60 days or thereabouts.
Right.
We've done that by shortening the evaluation of early proposals, assuming that this duration doesn't really factor in if there are no early proposals submitted to the commission. The real evaluation would come in after that.
Right.
Over here, or earlier if we're able to push this earlier to the new
Right.
date.
So we're gonna suggest, we're gonna tentatively accept your suggestion that we move the deadline, the application deadline closer by a month, that we give a 90-day window for applicant involuntary disbursements, 90 days prior to application, not less than 90 days prior. And if we can get that in a way up somewhere on our request for comment site, Elaine, quickly, because that will be something I think we're going to want to hear from people about. I had a couple things. This sheet that you all prepared, MGC acts and decisions needed to issue gaming licenses. I forget, who did this? Todd?
The legal department.
Okay. Is this going to get discussed at some point, or, because we got this a week or two ago, and I wasn't sure what happened to it, or is it going to get talked about, or what?
Well, from my perspective, it is going to get talked about as we move forward here in the discussions the rest of May.
Today?
No, not today. We weren't going to talk
Oh,
about it
okay,
today.
okay. But like next week or sometime soon, because this was a great, helpful document, and Elaine is interested in thinking about getting it out on the web in a certain format, but there also are some questions about it that I wanted to talk about, so that if you can put it in your report sometime soon.
Got it there.
Okay.
Yes.
And let's see, what else? So May 3rd, next Friday, you'll be prepared to give us a suggestion for the Region C process, right? Is that right?
Not on Friday
No.
the 3rd, no.
Oh, okay, when is that?
That would be the May 19th.
May 19th?
Right.
That's a month after we made the decision?
Yes. Well, it's the next regularly scheduled meeting date, so.
Oh, well, because that.
16.
16th.
16th.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
2 days less than a month.
Yeah, slightly less.
Right.
Well, can I just, we could follow a similar announcement of, like we did on Region A and B, and the form is open, would be the same, I suspect. It would be a matter of posting in the website that now it's been open, even though technically that has already been reported, and allow for a similar period unless we wanted that to be different for responses from what we had on the.
Well, that's what they're thinking through, is the extent to which it should be the same or not. But I guess now that I'm thinking about it,
Under what circumstances would be less or more?
well, that's what they're thinking about. You know, are there any circumstances under which it would be less or more, or would it be exactly the same? That's what they're thinking about.
Part of it could be the work, if you open up the phase ones at the same time, we're finishing up on evaluations of phase twos.
Oh, our own
How does it-
workload?
How does it work with our consultants, with our teams, those types of considerations?
Fair enough.
Does it distract from that effort of getting those category ones that we have now done and try to get those?
But I'm assuming whenever you do decide to open it, you'll hopefully allow for the same, 3-month process that we had from the time that, whenever we decide to open the bids to when we needed the phase 1 application due.
That's the idea, coming back with a proposed process to the commission, is to tie up all those sides. So that's kind of why we were waiting. And we're also looking at the decisions we're talking about here
Right,
today with
okay.
this.
Well, I guess there's, in one sense, we know we're going to give potential bidders some time to get organized. Regions A and B, people knew they were open, people have been working on that for a long time. There are a lot of people, maybe people, we don't know, who would be interested in Region C who haven't done any work because they didn't know that they were going to have an opportunity. So I think so now that I'm thinking about this, they now know that it's going to be open for commercial applications, so that while we wait to sort of button up our actual process, is giving them time we were probably going to have to give them anyway to start finding land, find partners, and so on and so forth. So I think that's fine. You know, I take that back. I think May 16th is fine.
Mr. Chairman, we would have to have these rule changes we were talking about ready for the 3rd.
Right. Well, yeah, you want those up for comment ASAP,
Yeah.
and, right, yeah. And then, so also on the 3rd, I think Commissioner McHugh and Commissioner Stebbins said on the 3rd, we will have a proposal on the evaluation process and weighting and consultants that we'll need and so forth. So that will be on Friday, right?
It's my hope we sent a memo to Executive Director Day yesterday, and trying to coordinate schedules when we have a chance to sit with him and talk about that. I'm not sure we're going to be able to do that by next Friday.
Because the Commissioner McHugh is out next week.
Oh, he's out all next week?
Yes.
Until Thursday.
Until Thursday.
What was the date of start of the procurement process? You came up with a date in which we
Right
need.
there. 5/17 is the latest that we could start writing an RFP or RFPs, if it's more than one, to be done or ready for when we receive applications.
Okay. So,
As early, no, yeah, these are early applications. This is a hypothetical. We really
Right.
need to be ready for this,
Right.
for this time.
Okay.
I think it's not modeled here. Consultants, certain consultants, I suspect, could be very helpful in the form of response that we still are in the process of finalizing.
In the what?
The application form.
oh, okay, yeah.
I would also add, when I've had a chance to work with Commissioner Zuniga on this, we've begun to kind of draft some RFPs for, at least in 2 critical areas where we know we're going to need assistance. One of those is financial. Second, we've gotten some input for what type of technical expertise we'll have on the site development issues itself. So those are 2 of the bigger main categories. And I'm also continuing to go through the evaluation criteria. We're having recommendations sent to us by some people we've outreached to with regard to modifications to the evaluation criteria, not the broad categories, but specific information we should be looking for. And because of the direction we might choose to take after meeting with Executive Director Day, we may end up, may consider having a program manager or a project manager to be the first RFP that we might issue to kind of oversee the process, as well as help us evaluate the expert teams we are considering bringing in.
Okay. Well, this is one of the places where we're still straddling the commission doing staff work and the staff doing the staff work. And here we've still got the commissioners doing some of the staff work. But May 16th is one day before May 17th, and May 17th was the day we had set out as the last day to get going on the RFP. So if we're, for the help we're going to need. But if we aren't going to be able to talk about, so it may be that the staff is going to have to get this ball rolling, and if you're already working on RFPs, then that's great. But it is getting a little bit time sensitive. I don't think, I mean, yes, it would be nice if we had them earlier, but that wasn't what we targeted. If we don't get that, we don't get that. But we don't want to slip beyond this if we can possibly avoid it. Okay. I think that was it for me. Anything else on your agenda?
No, sir.
Great.
That's it.
Well, I think this is really responsive to the meeting that we had, and I'm answering letters from all those folks now, so this will be helpful. Thank you very much. The last big thing on the agenda is the research on our agenda. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Right, sorry. Welcome.
Thank you.
Make sure you get the mic.
So the only reason we're really here today is just for your approval to send out the proposed regulations to the legislature for review, which is a statutory requirement for racing regulations. They're the same ones that you saw that you enacted by emergency. There's been no changes made to them. We're just looking to go in the next step on the process.
Did the emergency ones get sent to the legislature too?
No.
Oh, that didn't have to, so that, they haven't gone to the legislature yet.
That's correct. And we're also asking that you approve the extension of the emergency regulations for an additional 30 days, just so we cover the time frame for the legislature
Right.
to review it. But otherwise, they are the same regulations you've seen. We had our public hearing, and there were no changes.
Right, okay. I think from my standpoint, it's fine. I think we talked about this with Director Dernberger about having her give a few people a call, at the staff level to make sure that the committee, the proper committee chairs know they're coming and they don't just get lost in the shuffle. But this isn't legislation, though. This is just a heads
No,
up
it's
on
just
the
the
regs.
regulations.
Yeah, I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah.
So it still would be a good thing to do. It's good for her to have a little bit of a relationship with the appropriate committee staff. But I wasn't thinking right. I was thinking, was it legislation? Yeah, okay. Do you want to move or offer?
Sure. Do you have the exact CMR? I'm going to forget that amount, or
yes.
maybe move that to act on your recommendation.
It's CMR 4.00 and 6.00. But that's 205 CMR.
Right. Okay. Then I'll move that this commission approves the recommendation by the racing staff and council to forward the regulations adopted earlier on an emergency basis, CMR 205 4.00 and CMR 205 6.00, the racing regulations, and forward them to the legislature.
And extend the emergency.
And also extend the emergency period promulgation for another 30 days, as noted.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it unanimously.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, I wanted to just, Enrique and I spent the day, Commissioner Zuniga and I spent the day at the research group, but maybe since we're missing half of the team, 2/3 of the people who weren't there, we ought to, one thing we ought to just wait and report next week.
Sure. We could give a brief summary for the benefit of the agenda item, but I agree with you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay. Actually, there is one thing, though, that I can mention. basically, this was a meeting with the research team that is headquartered at UMass Amherst, led by Rachel Volberg and Rob Williams from Canada, saying they put their whole research team together. It must have been probably 12 people, something like that. And we spent the whole day with them going through the research project, and then had dinner with them, and it's great. It's a big project. We have the legislation gave an expansive mandate. We have interpreted that mandate as expansively as it can be interpreted, and the research people are completely with that program. So it's going to be a very big deal. Everybody's really excited about it. But there are some research parameters, Catherine, in sections 97 and 91, which are the two research sections, where the licensees are required to provide a bunch of information for us for the research, and it's controversial. It's taking a lot of their very proprietary information and anonymizing it, and then using it to do unusual research on problem gambling in particular. And I don't remember whether we have that in our regs at all or not. And if not, whether it's this phase or the next phase, we just need to make sure that we've paid attention to that. And in addition to the specific mandate in the legislation, we also need just sort of a general up speech, reg for them to cooperate on things like parking lot surveys and customer intercept surveys and things like that, which are not mandated in the law, but will be a part of our research project.
And more specifically, the legislation is very clear that the anonymizing data applies for the period of operations, and that's sometime in the future, and that's great. Part of what we should place in regulation is the general cooperation to the research effort prior to the operation and opening of casinos, because we really depend on all the sections of the legislation that deal with the research agenda. It's clear that this effort has to begin well in advance of the opening of casinos, and the cooperation of the applicants, eventually the licensees, we find is going to be crucial to the research effort.
But even on the anonymizing, even though it won't occur for 2 to 3 years probably, it's important that they have a heads up on this. I mean, it's kind of like, when we can assess license holders for our operating costs. It's in the law, but we made a point of putting it in our regs,
clarifying,
so that everybody has a complete, clear heads up on these issues. And we don't want somebody getting a license and then coming back to us and saying, "What do you mean we're going to give you all this information?" So that's just something heads up that I wanted to make sure that we remembered to pay attention to. We have, I think Commissioner Zuniga will talk about this at more length next week, but we have signed off on a 15-month budget, which is a little over $3 million to get the project going. It's very heavy in the front end because of all this massive baseline survey research that's being done. And Commissioner McHugh had asked for the cash flow, and so Commissioner Zuniga is going to talk to him about that. There's no point talking about that before he's here, and then we'll go over it as a group next week. But we have given them the go-ahead. We have approved the budget, and we're working on a interagency service agreement to execute quickly. We do, Catherine, also want to get are there any ethics rules that our research team would need to adhere to, that we would need to get to them?
They are consultants,
Yeah.
like our other consultants, so
Right.
yes, we should give them the enhanced ethics code and remind them of the ethics code in general, yes.
Okay, so if somewhere along the line, you or Todd or somebody can tell me what exactly I should send to them and what the right words are and stuff, or I'll tell you who to send it to. Rachel Volberg is the primary contact.
We've taken, as a matter of course, I am the one who discloses to the Ethics Commission every time we enter into a contract.
Okay.
And designate them as, as special state employees.
That's back when you were doing staff work.
That's right. Another thing to delegate to our
Right.
capable staff.
We talked to them about coordinating closely with DPH, Department of Public Health, and we've set, actually, there's a phone call with DPH tomorrow afternoon.
Okay.
Just so we can brief them on it, so we can put them in touch with our project. Because DPH does a lot of research and does a lot of work on problem gambling, and we want to make sure that we're not duplicating efforts.
And I will be in at the Mass Council's day-long meeting tomorrow in Beverly on problem gambling with an update about all of these matters.
Right. And there was two data points that were stunning. When we had our very first educational forum, we had Frank Fahrenkopf from the Gaming Association, AGA, come and speak as a keynote speaker, and then we had a whole bunch of people that Commissioner Cameron brought up from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And when Fahrenkopf was speaking, I asked him what % of revenues in casino operations came from problem gamblers. And he said that the 2.5% to 3% of typically are perceived as pathological or problem gamblers. And he said there was no data on that. Well, it turns out there is some, and Rachel Volberg, who we were just getting to know, gave me some. But Rob Williams, who is in charge of all the problem gambling and research for Canada, has recently done a study in Alberta, right? And one in Ontario.
That's correct.
In Ontario, 35% of revenues came from problem gamblers, and in Alberta, 50% of gaming came from problem gamblers. Now, there's reasons why that's an idiosyncratic situation. These are not destination resort casinos. There are extenuating circumstances, but it was just shocking numbers. And, you know, we are going to find out what our numbers are, and they are going to be what they are. But it was just kind of a sobering experience. I think those were the highlights. Did you have anything else you wanted to
No, I think
add?
it's a great group. It's enthusiastic, multidisciplinary.
Yeah.
A lot of not just the problem gambling side, but also the economic impacts. And you know, they're ready to get started.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, anything else on anybody's agenda? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you, everybody.